A rainy night call. There is something strangely dangerous about silence inside a marriage. Not the peaceful silence when two people sit together drinking coffee while rain touches the window. I mean the heavy silence. The kind that feels like two strangers sharing the same air while pretending everything is fine. The kind of silence that slowly turns a home into a hotel room. And honestly, if you have ever moved to another country, struggled with English, worked exhausting jobs, missed your family back home, and tried to survive marriage at the same time, then you already know this silence can become louder than screaming. That night in Texas, the rain sounded like tiny rocks hitting the roof of my old pickup truck. I remember staring at the parking lot outside a grocery store at almost midnight. The neon sign flickered like it was also tired of life. I had just finished a late shift stacking boxes in a warehouse where nobody talked slowly enough for me to understand. People think learning English in America is magical. Movies make it look cute. One happy song, one inspirational montage, and suddenly you sound like a Hollywood actor ordering coffee with confidence. Real life is uglier. Real life is standing in front of someone saying sorry 5 times until your soul leaves your body. My phone suddenly vibrated. It was my wife. Now, normally, a call from your wife should not feel like a horror movie soundtrack beginning in your chest. But when two people have spent months avoiding real conversations, even a simple ringtone can feel like a courtroom verdict. I stared at the screen for 3 seconds too long. That tiny delay already said everything about our marriage. I answered. "Are you coming home tonight?" she asked quietly.
No anger, no yelling.
Somehow that was worse. In the background, I could hear dishes moving. One of our kids coughing. The television talking to itself. Small family sounds. Tiny reminders that life was still moving while our relationship stood frozen like old meat in a forgotten freezer. "Yeah," I said.
Soon.
Another silence. Then she whispered something I still remember years later. "I don't think we can keep living like this." Funny how one sentence can feel heavier than an entire apartment building. At that moment, rainwater rolled down my windshield while my brain replayed every stupid argument we had during the past year. Not big, dramatic movie fights. Honestly, those are easier. At least screaming means people still care enough to fight. Our arguments were colder.
Smaller.
More dangerous. Little comments about money.
About time.
About parenting. About who was more tired. About dishes in the sink. About why I spent too many hours practicing English videos on YouTube instead of talking to her. Imagine destroying your marriage while trying to improve your listening skills. That irony deserves an award. The strange thing about pride is that it disguises itself as self-respect. Your brain tells you, don't apologize first. Don't look weak. Don't let them win. Meanwhile, your relationship quietly bleeds to death in the corner like an ignored patient in a hospital drama. Psychologists actually talk about this. Human beings are wired to protect their ego because the brain treats rejection almost like physical pain. Studies show emotional rejection activates similar brain regions as actual injury. Basically, your nervous system reacts to hurt feelings like somebody threw a chair at your soul. So instead of reconnecting, many couples defend themselves. They become emotional lawyers collecting evidence against each other. Nobody wins. Everybody becomes exhausted. And trust me, exhaustion changes people. Especially immigrants. Especially parents. Especially couples trying to survive America while pretending they are emotionally stable. Nobody tells you how lonely life can feel after moving to the United States. The highways are huge. The grocery stores are huge. Even the drinks are huge. But loneliness somehow grows even bigger. Back in Vietnam, life felt noisy and connected. Here in Texas, after work, I sometimes sat inside my car for 20 extra minutes before going home because I did not know how to enter the apartment without carrying all my stress inside with me. I kept learning English every night because I believed language would fix my life. I watched slow English conversations. I repeated simple phrases while driving. "How was your day? Can you help me? I understand." Ironically, I was becoming better at speaking English while becoming worse at speaking honestly to my own wife. That is the terrifying part about emotional distance. It never arrives dramatically. It arrives quietly. One ignored conversation. One delayed apology. One fake "I'm fine." One cold dinner. One exhausted night at a time. The rain outside became stronger. "I'm tired," my wife finally said on the phone. Those 3 words sound simple, right? But married people know there are at least 17 different versions of "I'm tired." Physical tiredness, emotional tiredness, financial tiredness, motherhood tiredness. The terrifying kind where somebody is tired of hoping things will improve. For a second, I almost defended myself again. My ego prepared its usual speech. "I work hard too. I'm stressed too. You don't understand me either." But something strange happened instead. I looked at my reflection in the windshield and suddenly saw a man who had become emotionally unavailable without even noticing. A man so focused on surviving America that he forgot survival means nothing if you lose your family on the way. That realization hit harder than the rain. So instead of arguing, I asked softly, "Do you want me to bring anything home?" Another silence. Then I heard her crying. Not loud movie crying. Quiet crying. The dangerous kind people try to hide by turning their face away from the phone. And suddenly I understood something most people realize far too late. Sometimes your partner is not asking for perfection. They're asking for presence. For softness. For one tiny sign that love still exists underneath all the stress, bills, accents, responsibilities, and emotional bruises. That night changed something inside me. Not instantly. Life is not a motivational TikTok clip with dramatic music and immediate transformation. Real healing is awkward and slow. Sometimes painfully slow. But that rainy night in Texas became the first crack in the wall my pride had built. And honestly, pride is weird. It can make intelligent adults emotionally behave like angry raccoons protecting garbage. I started the truck engine and drove home through empty wet streets while thinking about one terrifying question. What if the thing destroying my happiness was not America, money, English, stress, or bad luck? What if it was simply my inability to say, "I miss you too"? 2 different worlds. People love talking about the American dream like it is a shiny prize waiting for everybody at the airport. They imagine bright city lights, smiling neighbors, giant houses, and perfect English magically entering your brain the moment you land in the United States. Nobody talks enough about the emotional whiplash. Nobody warns you that sometimes moving to America feels less like chasing a dream and more like accidentally joining a survival reality show where the prize is mental stability. The first winter after I moved to the United States, I stood inside a Walmart at 2 in the morning staring at 30 different kinds of bread, like they were advanced mathematics. Honey wheat, whole grain, multigrain, sourdough, butter bread, keto bread, gluten-free bread. In Vietnam, bread was simple. Here, even toast had career options. And somehow that tiny moment made me feel unbelievably homesick. That is the weird thing about culture shock. It is rarely one giant dramatic disaster. It is thousands of tiny, confusing moments slowly attacking your confidence until you begin questioning your own identity. You suddenly become a grown adult who cannot understand parking signs, pharmacy instructions, insurance forms, or why Americans wear shorts when the weather feels cold enough to freeze your soul. Meanwhile, everybody around you keeps moving fast. Too fast. The conversations felt fast. The highways felt fast. Even grocery cashiers sounded like auctioneers. "Hey, how are you findi vera thing to Caviana today?" My brain translated maybe 4% of that sentence. I smiled like a confused tourist, trying not to panic. At home, things became even stranger. Back in Vietnam, family life felt naturally connected. People talked loudly. Relatives appeared unexpectedly. Neighbors somehow knew your business before you did. But in Texas, everything felt quiet and organized in a way that almost scared me. Our apartment building looked peaceful from the outside, but inside those walls, many people were lonely without admitting it, including me, including my wife. At first, we tried to treat everything like an adventure. We took photos in front of giant supermarkets. We laughed about confusing American commercials. We practiced English together at night. Sometimes we repeated simple phrases like children preparing for school. How are you today? I'm doing well. Thank you. Can I help you? Very romantic stuff. Truly Hollywood material. But stress changes the atmosphere inside a marriage faster than people realize. Especially financial stress. Especially immigrant stress. Especially when two exhausted adults secretly expect each other to become emotional superheroes. My wife adapted faster than I did. She learned routines quickly. She understood American systems faster. She spoke English more confidently in public. And instead of feeling proud like a supportive husband, part of me felt embarrassed. Isn't that ridiculous? The person I loved most was succeeding, yet my ego quietly transformed her progress into proof of my own insecurity. Instead of viewing success as shared growth, insecure brains interpret it as competition. Basically, your mind turns marriage into an accidental Olympic event nobody agreed to join. I started noticing small things. At restaurants, waiters understood her more easily than me. At school meetings for our children, she spoke confidently while I sat quietly trying to catch every third sentence. Phone calls terrified me because American customer service conversations sounded like speed chess played with invisible rules. One afternoon, I spent almost 20 minutes trying to schedule a doctor appointment because I could not understand the receptionist's accent. By the end of the call, I felt like my IQ had collapsed into mashed potatoes. And here is the dangerous part. When people feel ashamed, they often become emotionally distant instead of emotionally honest. I stopped talking about my struggles. I smiled more falsely. I answered, I'm fine automatically, like a customer service robot programmed by sadness. Meanwhile, my wife carried her own invisible stress. She worked long hours, handled paperwork, managed the children, cooked meals, and tried to keep our family emotionally stable while adapting to American life herself. But because both of us were overwhelmed, neither of us noticed how lonely the other person had become. That happens in many marriages. Two people drowning beside each other while both saying, I'm okay. One night we argued about something unbelievably stupid.
Laundry.
Not betrayal. Not money. Not cheating. Towels. I accidentally mixed white clothes with dark clothes, and several shirts changed color. Honestly, the shirts looked like they had survived a natural disaster. My wife became frustrated. I became defensive. Within minutes, two exhausted immigrants were emotionally fighting over cotton fabric like world leaders negotiating peace treaties. But the argument was never really about laundry. That is another strange truth about relationships. The visible argument is usually just the tip of a hidden emotional iceberg. Underneath small fights are deeper fears. Fear of being unsupported. Fear of being unseen. Fear of carrying too much responsibility alone. Neuroscience actually explains why stress makes couples more reactive. Chronic stress increases cortisol levels, which weakens emotional regulation. In simple language, tired brains become dramatic little goblins. Small problems suddenly feel enormous because your nervous system is already overloaded. America did not create our problems. It magnified them. The fast pace, the bills, the pressure, the loneliness, the endless feeling that we needed to prove ourselves worthy of being here. One evening after work, I sat alone in a parking lot eating cold fast food inside my truck because I did not want my children seeing how emotionally drained I felt. Outside, giant American flags moved in the wind while country music played softly from another car nearby. The whole scene looked cinematic, but emotionally I felt completely disconnected from my own life. Then something strange happened. An older man parked beside me rolled down his window and said, "Long day?" Simple sentence. 3 words. Yet somehow my chest tightened immediately. Because sometimes when people finally ask how you are doing, your emotions realize they have been waiting months to speak. I smiled politely and said, "Yeah, long day." He nodded slowly like somebody who understood more than I said aloud. "You'll be all right," he replied before driving away. That conversation lasted maybe 12 seconds. But I sat there thinking about it for nearly an hour. Because deep down, I knew the problem was not only language or culture shock anymore. The real danger was emotional isolation. I was slowly becoming a stranger inside my own marriage while pretending everything was normal. And pretending is exhausting. Your brain burns incredible energy maintaining emotional masks. Studies show suppressing emotions increases mental fatigue and relationship dissatisfaction over time. Basically, fake emotional strength is expensive. Eventually, the bill arrives. That night, when I finally walked into our apartment, I saw my wife asleep on the couch beside our youngest child. The television was still on. One small lamp illuminated the room softly. She looked tired even in sleep. And for the first time in months, I stopped seeing her as the person arguing with me. I saw her as somebody struggling beside me. Two immigrants. Two exhausted parents. Two people standing in the same storm but accidentally blaming each other for the rain. English felt impossible. Nobody warns you that learning English in America can make you feel like your personality has been kidnapped. Back in Vietnam, I was funny. I could tell stories, joke naturally, explain my feelings, even argue passionately when needed. Words flowed easily. Then suddenly I moved to the United States and transformed into a grown man whose entire emotional range became okay, sorry, and nervous smiling. Honestly, I started feeling like a background character in my own life. One morning in Texas, I walked into a coffee shop before work because I wanted to practice speaking English confidently. Very inspirational main character energy. I had rehearsed my sentence in the car nearly 12 times. Can I have a medium coffee with cream and sugar? Simple.
Clean. Safe.
I stepped forward proudly when the barista asked for my order. Then she responded at lightning speed. Shuri wat kindoff cream mudayo alaiki and doyo interim for hour coffee. My brain immediately left the building. For 2 horrifying seconds, all I heard was aggressive bird sounds mixed with American enthusiasm. I panicked and accidentally said, yes. To this day, I still do not know what I agreed to buy. I walked out holding a giant ice drink that tasted like melted birthday cake, mixed with confusion. And weirdly enough, that tiny moment ruined my confidence for days. That sounds dramatic, but psychologists actually understand this phenomenon. Language is deeply connected to identity and self-esteem. When adults cannot express themselves clearly, the brain experiences social threat. Your nervous system starts treating ordinary conversations like survival situations. That is why so many immigrants feel exhausted after simple errands. Their brains are running emotional marathons inside grocery stores. I became terrified of conversations. Phone calls? Absolutely not. Fast food drive-thrus? Basically extreme sports. Parent-teacher meetings?
My soul left my body every single time.
The hardest part was not grammar. It was shame. Shame is sneaky because it changes your behavior quietly. You stop asking questions. You avoid social situations. You pretend to understand things you absolutely do not understand. One time at work, my supervisor explained an entire task to me while I nodded confidently like a motivational speaker. I understood maybe 9% of his instructions.
9%.
2 hours later, I accidentally organized several boxes incorrectly and nearly caused a shipping disaster. My supervisor looked frustrated. I felt humiliated. That night I sat in my truck after work gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. And instead of admitting I felt overwhelmed, I became emotionally colder at home. That is the strange cycle many people never notice. Emotional insecurity often disguises itself as irritation. When humans feel powerless in one area of life, they sometimes try to regain control somewhere else. So instead of saying, I feel small and embarrassed, your brain says, be defensive about dishes for no reason. Very mature system. Truly brilliant emotional engineering by evolution. Meanwhile, social media kept showing perfect immigrant success stories. Fluent English after 6 months. Happy, smiling couples. Beautiful houses. Successful businesses. Everybody online looked emotionally stable while I was internally collapsing because a cashier asked me, paper or plastic? At night, I practiced English obsessively. I watched slow English stories on YouTube. I repeated phrases while brushing my teeth. I listened to podcasts during work breaks. How are you doing today? I'm still learning English. Can you say that again slowly? Sometimes I whispered these sentences quietly before sleeping like survival prayers. And honestly, there were moments I wanted to quit completely. Not just learning English. Everything. Because when adults repeatedly fail at communication, they begin doubting their value as human beings. Research in psychology shows chronic communication stress can increase anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. Your brain starts predicting embarrassment before conversations even happen. Basically, your nervous system becomes an overprotective parent yelling, "Don't talk to anybody. It's dangerous out there." One afternoon, something happened that nearly broke me emotionally. I was at my son's school for a small event. Parents stood around talking casually while children played nearby. Everybody seemed relaxed except me. I smiled awkwardly while trying to understand conversations flying around like tennis balls moving too fast. Then another parent asked me a simple question. "So, what do you do?" That should have been easy. But suddenly I froze. Not because I did not know English words. Because I felt ashamed of my answer. I worked long, exhausting shifts at a warehouse. My back hurt constantly. My English still sounded broken. My marriage felt distant. My dreams looked smaller than they did years earlier. So instead of answering proudly, I gave a short, embarrassed response. "Oh, warehouse work." The parent nodded politely and continued chatting with someone else. That moment lasted maybe 15 seconds. But my ego turned it into emotional evidence that I was failing at life. Funny how the brain does that. It collects tiny, painful moments and edits them into a fake documentary called Reasons You Are Not Good Enough. That evening, I came home irritated for absolutely no logical reason. My wife asked how my day went.
Fine, he answered coldly.
Dinner became quiet. Our children sensed tension immediately because children are emotional detectives. They notice energy long before adults admit problems exist. My daughter tried telling us a funny story from school, but both of us were too mentally exhausted to react naturally. And suddenly guilt hit me hard, because I realized something painful. I had become so obsessed with surviving America that I stopped emotionally participating in my own family. I was physically present, emotionally absent, like a man watching his own life through thick glass. Later that night, unable to sleep, I sat alone in the kitchen scrolling through old photos from Vietnam. Family dinners, loud conversations, motorbike traffic, familiar streets. In every photo, I looked lighter somehow, less guarded, less tired. Then I noticed something else. In almost every old picture, my wife was laughing beside me. That laugh had slowly disappeared in America, not because she stopped loving me, because stress had slowly replaced joy inside both of us. I suddenly remembered something a language teacher once said in a YouTube video. People do not learn English fastest when they are perfect. They learn fastest when they stop being afraid of mistakes. At first, that sounds obvious. But emotionally, that sentence is terrifying. Because many adults would rather stay silent forever than risk sounding foolish for 30 seconds. The next morning before work, I tried something different. At a gas station counter, instead of rushing nervously, I forced myself to speak slowly. "Good morning. How are you today?" The cashier smiled warmly. "I'm good. And you?" For the first time in months, I answered without panic. "I'm doing okay. Still learning English." And then something unbelievably small happened. She smiled again and said, "You're doing great." That was it. Tiny conversation. Maybe 10 seconds. But sometimes one kind interaction arrives exactly when your exhausted brain desperately needs proof that progress is possible. Driving to work afterward, I realized something important. Maybe fluency was not the real goal anymore. Maybe the real goal was courage. Because language is not only vocabulary and grammar. It is vulnerability. It is risking embarrassment. It is allowing yourself to sound imperfect while still believing your voice deserves space in the world. And honestly, that lesson would eventually save far more than my English. It would slowly begin saving my marriage too. The fight at dinner. You can tell a relationship is struggling when even the sound of somebody chewing starts feeling emotionally aggressive. That night looked completely normal from the outside, which honestly is how many marriages quietly fall apart in America. No dramatic movie soundtrack. No plates flying across the kitchen. Just two exhausted adults sitting under warm apartment lights pretending they are not emotionally drowning. The smell of garlic chicken filled the room while our children talked about school. The television played softly in the background. Outside, cold wind pushed against the windows of our small Texas apartment. Everything appeared peaceful, but emotionally, the atmosphere felt like a microwave with a bomb inside. I had just returned from another exhausting warehouse shift. My shoulders hurt. My brain hurt. Even my patience had apparently packed its bags and moved to another country. Meanwhile, my wife looked equally drained after balancing work, school paperwork, grocery shopping, cooking, and taking care of the kids almost entirely in English all day. Nobody teaches immigrants how to rest properly. You either work, worry, or feel guilty for sitting down. That becomes your personality for a while. At dinner, my son accidentally spilled juice across the table. A completely normal child event. Tiny human makes tiny disaster. Happens every day in every country on earth. But stress transforms ordinary moments into emotional landmines. My wife sighed heavily while cleaning the mess. Then she looked at me and quietly said, "Can you help a little faster instead of staring at your phone?" Now, logically, this was a harmless sentence. Emotionally, my exhausted brain heard something completely different. You are failing as a husband and father. Amazing how the human nervous system can translate one simple comment into a full psychological attack. Immediately, I became defensive. I just sat down. I replied coldly. She kept wiping the table. I know. But I've been doing everything since this afternoon. There it was. That invisible relationship scoreboard. Who works harder? Who sacrifices more?
Who is more exhausted?
Couples rarely say it directly, but many arguments secretly become emotional math competitions. Both people want acknowledgement. Both people want appreciation. But instead of honestly asking for love, humans often request it through irritation. Psychologists call this protest behavior. When emotional needs feel unmet, people express pain indirectly through criticism, sarcasm, withdrawal, or defensiveness. Basically, adults sometimes emotionally communicate like confused raccoons fighting over trash instead of saying, "I need comfort. I should have helped immediately. I should have listened." Instead, pride entered the room, wearing invisible boxing gloves. "You think I'm not tired too?" I snapped. My wife stopped moving for a second. That silence right there? Dangerous. Because when hurt people become quiet, it usually means emotions are shifting from frustration into disappointment. Our children looked down at their food, and suddenly the dinner table felt smaller. I kept talking anyway because insecure people often become louder when they secretly feel ashamed. "I work all day too," I said. "You act like I do nothing." She laughed softly. Not happy laughter, the exhausted kind. "I never said you do nothing. But you always make me feel that way." There is something strange about unresolved stress. Old arguments hide inside new conversations waiting for opportunities to escape. Suddenly, we were no longer discussing spilled juice. We were arguing about months of loneliness, pressure, exhaustion, and emotional distance. My wife finally looked directly at me. "You don't even talk to us anymore." That sentence hit hard because it was true. I talked to coworkers more than my family. I practiced English with strangers online more than with my wife. At home, I mostly carried stress from room to room like emotional luggage. But instead of admitting that truth, My ego activated emergency defense mode. "You don't understand what I'm going through," I muttered. And honestly, that sentence is relationship gasoline. Because exhausted people almost always believe they are the misunderstood hero of the story. My wife placed the towel down slowly. "What about what I'm going through?" she asked quietly. Again, simple sentence. But suddenly my brain replayed everything she handled every day. School calls,
Bills. Cooking.
translating documents, helping the children adapt to American culture, managing emotional stability inside a family that was slowly drifting apart. For one brief second, compassion almost appeared. Then my pride ruined it. "You're stronger than me anyway," I said sarcastically. The moment those words left my mouth, I regretted them. Not because they were completely false, because they were cruel. Sometimes sarcasm is just sadness, wearing a leather jacket pretending not to care. My wife stared at me with tired eyes that looked older than they used to. "You know what?" she whispered. "I miss who you were before we came here." That sentence cut deeper than yelling ever could, because secretly, I miss that version of myself too. The version who laughed easily. The version who danced in the kitchen with her while music played. The version who did not feel constantly anxious every time somebody spoke English too quickly. America had changed me, not into a terrible person, just into a tired one. And tired people accidentally hurt each other all the time. Neuroscience explains why emotional control becomes harder under chronic stress. Lack of rest and constant pressure weaken the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for patience, empathy, and decision-making. Meanwhile, emotional reactivity increases. In simple terms, exhausted brains become dramatic little goblins that think every conversation is a threat. Our children quietly left the table. That was the moment reality finally punched me emotionally. Because nothing feels more heartbreaking than watching children escape tension adults created. But somehow even then, neither of us apologized. Amazing, right? Two people who clearly loved each other standing inches apart emotionally while both waiting for the other person to surrender first. That is pride. Pride is emotional stubbornness disguised as dignity. Eventually, my wife carried dishes to the sink while I sat there pretending anger felt safer than vulnerability. The apartment became painfully quiet. Water ran softly from the faucet. Somewhere outside, a car alarm started screaming into the night for absolutely no reason. Honestly, it matched the mood perfectly. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to say, "I'm scared too." But fear does strange things to people, especially men raised to believe vulnerability equals weakness. So instead, I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. Very mature behavior. Truly inspirational husband material. Later that night, I heard my wife crying softly in the bathroom. Not loud enough for attention. Quiet enough to hide. And that sound haunted me. Because once you hear somebody crying privately because of pain connected to you, something changes inside your chest forever. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor while my brain replayed every small moment that led us here. The immigration stress, the loneliness, the communication struggles, the emotional distance, the pride. Then another terrifying thought arrived. What if relationships do not suddenly break one day? What if they slowly starve because both people become too exhausted to keep feeding kindness into them? Around 2 a.m, I walked quietly into the kitchen for water. My wife was asleep on the couch under a blanket. One small lamp still glowed beside her. Even after our fight, she had folded my work clothes neatly for the next morning. That destroyed me emotionally, because love was still there, hidden underneath stress, hidden underneath resentment, hidden underneath two wounded egos trying to survive life in America without admitting how afraid they really were. And for the first time, I realized something deeply uncomfortable. Maybe our marriage was not dying from lack of love. Maybe it was dying from lack of softness. Pride builds invisible walls. There is a terrifying moment in many relationships when two people stop trying to understand each other and start trying to protect themselves. Instead, that moment does not arrive dramatically.
No Sander.
No cinematic music. No emotional speech under the rain. It arrives quietly inside everyday routines. One person becomes colder. The other becomes quieter. Conversations shrink into logistics. Did you pay the bill? What time is the meeting? Can you pick up the kids? Suddenly the relationship starts sounding less like love and more like co-workers managing a small exhausted company. That was us. Living together. Functioning together. But emotionally, we were slowly disappearing from each other. After the fight at dinner, something changed inside the apartment. Not visibly. We still worked, still cooked, still cleaned, still smiled around the children. But there was tension floating through the rooms like invisible smoke. And the worst part? Both of us noticed it. Neither of us knew how to fix it. That is the dangerous thing about pride. Pride loves silence because silence creates emotional distance, and emotional distance protects the ego from vulnerability. Your brain whispers things like, don't apologize first. If they care, they will come to you. Meanwhile, both people stand emotionally stranded on separate islands waiting for rescue boats. Neither wants to launch. One Saturday morning, I woke early and sat alone in the kitchen drinking coffee before sunrise. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Outside, Texas skies still looked dark blue before morning fully arrived. America loves productivity culture. Hustle harder. Wake up earlier. Grind more. Become stronger. Nobody online says, hey, maybe your nervous system is exhausted and your marriage needs tenderness more than ambition. My wife walked into the kitchen wearing an oversized sweater, looking tired before the day even began. Morning, she said softly.
Morning.
That was it. Two people who once talked for hours now communicating like polite strangers trapped inside an elevator. She opened the refrigerator quietly. I checked my phone again, pretending deep interest in absolutely nothing. And suddenly I realized something painful. Avoidance had become our daily routine. Psychologists describe avoidance as one of the strongest predictors of emotional disconnection in relationships.
Why?
Because unresolved tension forces the brain into defensive mode. Instead of seeking closeness, humans unconsciously seek emotional safety. The nervous system prioritizes protection over connection. Basically, your relationship slowly transforms into emotional hide and seek. And honestly, pride is sneaky because it often feels justified. I kept replaying our arguments inside my head like a lawyer preparing evidence. She doesn't appreciate me. She doesn't understand my pressure. She criticizes me too much. But deep down, another quieter voice kept asking uncomfortable questions. When was the last time you asked how she was really feeling? When was the last time you hugged her without distraction? When was the last time you looked at her without carrying resentment into the room? That quieter voice was annoying, mostly because it was correct. Later that afternoon, I drove alone to a large shopping center because I needed space, which is emotionally exhausted husband language for, I want to sit alone in a parking lot questioning my life while pretending I'm buying groceries. America has enormous parking lots. Massive oceans of asphalt where people quietly eat fast food inside their cars while rethinking every decision they have ever made. Honestly, some of the deepest emotional crises in the United States probably happen beside Target stores. I sat there watching people walk past carrying shopping bags while my brain replayed memories from years earlier. Back before immigration stress. Back before endless bills. Back before English anxiety transformed me into somebody constantly emotionally guarded. My wife used to laugh at tiny things. I used to notice tiny things. The way she sang while cooking. The way she held our children's hands crossing streets. The way she looked at me when life still felt simple. Then suddenly another realization hit me harder than expected. Maybe stress had not destroyed our love. Maybe it had buried it underneath survival mode. Neuroscience explains that chronic stress changes human behavior significantly. When the brain remains overloaded too long, emotional empathy decreases while self-protection increases. Your nervous system becomes hyper-focused on problems, threats, exhaustion, and unmet needs. In simple language, stressed people stop acting like teammates and start acting like emotionally tired lawyers defending themselves. That was exactly what happened to us. Two good people. Two overwhelmed immigrants. Two exhausted parents accidentally turning pain against each other instead of toward the actual problem. And the actual problem was never really dishes, money, or laundry. It was emotional loneliness. That night, something unexpectedly small cracked my pride open a little. I came home late after work and noticed the apartment unusually quiet. The children were asleep already. A soft lamp glowed in the living room. My wife sat alone on the couch folding tiny clothes while watching some random American reality show neither of us truly understood. For a second, I just stood there watching her. She looked tired. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just deeply tired. And suddenly I saw something I had ignored for months. She was lonely too. That realization sounds obvious now. But pride blinds people emotionally because ego keeps asking, what about my pain? Instead of what pain are they carrying? I sat down carefully across from her. She did not look up immediately. You ate already? She asked quietly.
Yeah.
Another silence. Then she folded one tiny shirt slowly and whispered, the kids miss you. That sentence nearly shattered me. Because I realized my emotional absence had become visible even to our children. And children notice everything. They notice tension hidden behind smiles. They notice coldness hidden inside routine conversations. They notice when parents stop laughing naturally together. Research shows children are extremely sensitive to emotional atmospheres at home. Even when adults avoid open conflict, kids still absorb stress through tone, facial expressions, and energy shifts. Basically, children become emotional weather forecasters without realizing it. I leaned back against the couch feeling exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. You think I'm a bad father? I asked quietly. She finally looked at me, and instead of anger, I saw sadness. No, she said softly. I think you're hurting. That sentence broke something inside my chest. Because for months I had prepared myself for criticism, not compassion. And honestly, compassion is dangerous when you have spent too long emotionally defended. It slips through cracks your pride worked very hard to build. For the first time in months, I wanted to tell her the truth. How scared I felt speaking English sometimes. How ashamed I felt comparing myself to others. How exhausted I felt pretending to stay strong all the time. But vulnerability is terrifying when your identity has become built around survival. So instead, I stared at the folded children's clothes in silence while emotions crowded inside my throat like traffic. Then my wife said something I still remember clearly. We came to America together, she whispered. But somewhere along the way, it feels like you started suffering alone. That sentence haunted me, because she was right. I had isolated myself emotionally while convincing myself I was protecting everyone else. That is the cruel joke pride plays on people. It tells you emotional walls keep you safe, but eventually those same walls trap you inside your own loneliness. And sitting there beside my exhausted wife in that quiet apartment, I finally understood something uncomfortable. The longer two people refuse vulnerability, the more strangers they become, even while sleeping inches apart. A small English notebook. Sometimes healing does not begin with a life-changing speech. Sometimes it begins with a cheap notebook from Walmart costing $3.49. That little notebook looked unbelievably unimportant sitting on the shelf between school supplies and discounted pens. Blue cover. Thin pages. Probably manufactured somewhere far away by exhausted humans questioning capitalism. Yet somehow, that notebook quietly became one of the most important things in my life. At that point, my English still sounded broken. My confidence still looked like it had been attacked by wild animals. My marriage still felt emotionally fragile. But after that conversation with my wife in the living room, something shifted inside me. Not dramatic transformation. Not motivational movie energy. Just a small, exhausting realization. I could not continue living emotionally locked inside my own head. So, I bought the notebook. At first, the plan sounded simple. Every night after work, I would write a few English sentences about my day. Nothing complicated. Just slow, honest English practice connected to real emotions. But the strange thing about honesty is that once it starts leaking out, it rarely stays small. The first sentence I wrote looked almost embarrassingly simple. I feel tired today. That was it. 6 words. Yet staring at that sentence made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Because it was probably the first emotionally honest thing I had admitted to myself in months. The next night, I wrote another sentence. I miss talking to my wife. Then another. I feel afraid when people speak fast English. Then another. I think my children can feel my stress. Suddenly the notebook stopped becoming language practice. It became emotional survival. Psychologists often explain that writing helps regulate emotions because it organizes chaotic thoughts into structured language. Studies on expressive writing show that putting feelings into words can reduce stress, improve emotional processing, and even strengthen mental resilience. Basically, your brain calms down slightly when emotions stop spinning wildly and finally land somewhere concrete. In simple language, your nervous system enjoys honesty more than pretending. Every night after work, I sat quietly at the kitchen table practicing English while the apartment slept. Sometimes the refrigerator hummed louder than my confidence. Sometimes I erased sentences repeatedly because even private honesty felt uncomfortable. One evening I wrote, I think pride is making me lonely. I stared at that sentence for nearly 10 minutes, because deep down, I knew it was true. Pride had convinced me vulnerability was weakness. Pride told me strong men should handle stress silently. Pride told me apologizing first meant losing. But honestly, pride was not protecting me anymore. It was isolating me. And isolation does strange things to people. You stop laughing naturally. You stop touching affectionately. You stop telling the truth about how exhausted you really feel. Then eventually you wake up emotionally disconnected from the people you love most while pretending everything is fine. One night while writing, I accidentally heard my wife crying quietly in the bathroom again. That sound destroyed my concentration immediately. I sat frozen at the kitchen table holding the pen while guilt crawled through my chest like ice water. Because suddenly I realized something deeply uncomfortable. I kept waiting for her to emotionally rescue me while ignoring how much pain she carried herself. That realization changed the way I wrote afterward. My notebook slowly became less about my struggles and more about understanding our shared suffering. I wrote things like, She looks tired every day. She misses home too. She also feels pressure. She also feels alone sometimes. Funny how empathy returns the moment ego becomes quieter. Neuroscience actually supports this. Emotional self-reflection increases activity in brain regions connected to empathy and emotional regulation. In other words, honest reflection literally helps humans reconnect emotionally instead of remaining trapped inside defensive thinking patterns. So technically, my cheap Walmart notebook was doing better therapy work than my stubborn ego. One Saturday afternoon, my daughter found the notebook accidentally while drawing pictures at the kitchen table. "Daddy, what's this?" she asked. I panicked immediately, like the notebook contained classified government secrets instead of emotionally exhausted English sentences. "Just English practice," I replied awkwardly. She opened a random page and slowly read one sentence aloud with adorable child pronunciation. "I want to become a better listener." Then she smiled proudly. "Your English is getting better, Daddy." That tiny moment almost made me cry right there beside a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. Because children encourage people so naturally.
No ego. No judgment.
Just love delivered in small, honest sentences. That night, for the first time in months, I showed my wife part of the notebook. Honestly, my hands shook slightly. Not because the English was bad. Because she sat beside me quietly while reading several pages under soft kitchen light. Outside, cold wind pushed against the apartment windows again. Texas nights always felt strangely lonely to me, even when surrounded by people. At first she said nothing. Then she touched one page gently and whispered, "You wrote all this?" I nodded. And suddenly I felt more nervous than during any English conversation in America. Because emotional honesty is harder than grammar. Much harder. She kept reading quietly. Some pages contain mistakes everywhere. Wrong tenses. Broken sentence structure.
Terrible grammar.
Honestly, parts of it looked like emotional damage translated through Google Translate and exhaustion. But hidden inside those imperfect sentences was something I had not given her in a long time. Truth. Real truth. Not defensive truth. Not angry truth. Not filtered survival mode truth. Just honest, vulnerable truth. Finally, she stopped at one sentence. "I miss us." Her eyes filled slightly with tears. And right there, sitting together beside cheap kitchen lighting and unfinished bills and ordinary apartment stress, something invisible softened between us. Not fully healed, not magically fixed, but softer, safer. Like two emotionally exhausted people finally lowering their weapons for one quiet moment. "You never say these things out loud," she whispered. That sentence hit me hard because she was right again. I had become emotionally silent while hoping people would magically understand my pain anyway. Which honestly is like hiding your phone signal and then becoming angry nobody calls you. The human brain is ridiculous sometimes. I looked down at the notebook and laughed softly. "My English feels braver on paper," I admitted. She smiled sadly. "Maybe because paper doesn't interrupt you." Oof. That sentence deserved emotional damage awards. But she was right. When people fear judgment, paper feels safer than conversation. Writing creates space.
No interruptions. No defensive reactions.
No fear of saying things imperfectly. That notebook slowly changed our evenings. Not dramatically, just quietly. Sometimes my wife asked about new sentences I practiced. Sometimes we repeated English phrases together. Sometimes we laughed at my terrible pronunciation attempts late at night while the children slept.
Teen moments.
Tiny softness. Tiny reconnections. And honestly, relationships rarely heal through giant romantic gestures. Most healing happens through small repeated acts of emotional safety. One kind sentence. One honest confession. One moment of listening without defense. One tiny notebook filled with imperfect English and exhausted truth. Weeks later, while rereading older pages, I noticed something surprising. The English was improving, but more importantly, so was my heart. Because somewhere between grammar mistakes and late-night honesty, I finally understood something life-changing. People do not reconnect by winning emotional battles. They reconnect by feeling emotionally safe enough to stop fighting in the first place. The day she cried. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that happens when you suddenly realize the strong person in your life has been quietly falling apart while trying not to burden you. And honestly, that realization can hit harder than any argument. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday in Texas, which feels unfair somehow. You expect life-changing, emotional moments to arrive during dramatic storms or cinematic late-night conversations. Not while somebody is reheating leftover soup in sweatpants under weak apartment lighting. That morning already felt strange. The apartment was unusually quiet. The children had gone to school early. Rain clouds covered the sky outside, turning everything gray and sleepy. My wife moved slowly through the kitchen like somebody carrying invisible weight attached to every step. At first, I told myself she was just tired. But deep down, I knew this was different. Humans are surprisingly good at sensing emotional shifts in people they love. Your brain notices tiny changes automatically. Tone of voice, walking speed, facial tension, silence length. Neuroscientists explain this through emotional attunement, where close relationships train the brain to recognize subtle emotional patterns almost instinctively. Basically, love turns people into emotional detectives. And that morning, every signal inside me whispered the same thing. Something was wrong. Before leaving for work, I asked softly, "You okay?" Now, normally she answered automatically,
"I'm fine."
That universal human sentence, meaning absolutely nothing. But this time she paused. Too long. Then she forced a small smile and nodded anyway. Just tired. I almost left. Honestly, old version of me probably would have. Survival mode teaches people to avoid emotional complexity because exhausted brains crave simplicity.
Go to work.
Pay bills. Keep functioning. Repeat until emotionally crispy. But something stopped me at the door. Maybe the notebook had changed me more than I realized. Maybe I finally started listening instead of merely hearing. So instead of leaving immediately, I sat down at the kitchen table again. And for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The microwave beeped somewhere behind her. Tiny, ordinary sounds floating around a conversation neither of us knew how to begin. Then suddenly she sat down across from me and covered her face with both hands. And she started crying. Not graceful movie crying. Not dramatic yelling. The kind of crying that looks physically exhausting. Years of pressure leaving somebody's body all at once. That sound shattered something inside me immediately. Because strong people rarely cry unless they have been emotionally carrying too much for too long. At first she tried apologizing between tears, which honestly broke my heart even more. "I'm sorry," she whispered repeatedly. Imagine hurting so deeply that you apologize for having emotions. That is what chronic stress does to people. Psychologists explain that long-term emotional overload often pushes humans into emotional suppression mode. People become so focused on survival and responsibility that they stop processing their own feelings entirely. Eventually, the nervous system reaches capacity. Then emotions burst out unexpectedly over something seemingly small. But the tears are never really about one moment. They are about accumulated exhaustion finally demanding attention. "I can't do everything anymore," she whispered. And suddenly words started pouring out of her like a dam breaking open. She talked about work stress, about struggling with English during school meetings, about feeling lonely in America, about missing family back home, about constantly pretending to stay strong for the children, about feeling emotionally abandoned by me even when I sat beside her every night. Every sentence felt like another piece of hidden pain I should have noticed sooner. And the terrifying part? Somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking deeply enough to discover any of it. That realization filled me with guilt immediately. Not dramatic guilt. Heavy guilt. The quiet adult kind that settles into your chest and forces uncomfortable honesty. While she cried, I noticed something heartbreaking. She looked exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. Her shoulders carried tension constantly. Her eyes looked emotionally older than before we moved to America. And suddenly memories flooded my mind all at once. The long work shifts. The late-night paperwork. The endless cooking and cleaning. The children needing help adapting to school. The pressure of surviving in a country that still sometimes felt emotionally foreign to both of us. Meanwhile, I had spent months drowning inside my own insecurity without fully seeing how deeply she was drowning too. That is one cruel thing about pain. When just emotionally overloaded, the brain narrows attention toward personal survival. Two hurting people can accidentally stop seeing each other clearly. And honestly, that realization terrified me, because I suddenly saw where our marriage was heading if nothing changed. Not explosive divorce. Not dramatic betrayal. Something sadder. Emotional disappearance. Two good people slowly becoming strangers through exhaustion. My wife wiped tears from her face and whispered something I still remember perfectly. "I miss feeling safe with you." That sentence nearly destroyed me emotionally, because deep down I knew exactly what she meant. Safety in relationships is not only physical presence, it is emotional presence. Feeling heard, feeling understood, feeling like your pain matters too. Neuroscience research shows emotional safety strongly affects relationship satisfaction and stress regulation. When people feel emotionally safe, cortisol levels decrease while connection hormones like oxytocin increase. In simple language, kindness literally helps the nervous system relax. Meanwhile, emotional distance keeps the body trapped in stress mode. Basically, cold marriages slowly exhaust human biology. I moved beside her quietly, and for the first time in months, I held her without trying to fix anything immediately.
No defensive explanations. No excuses.
No emotional lawyer speeches. Just listening. Just presence. And strangely, that silence felt different from the painful silences we had before. This silence felt soft.
Human. Real.
After a while, she laughed weakly through tears and said, "We moved to America chasing a better life. And somehow we forgot how to enjoy life together."
Oof.
Another emotionally violent sentence disguised as casual honesty. But again, she was right. We became obsessed with surviving, improving English, working harder, paying bills, building stability. Meanwhile, joy quietly left the relationship without either of us noticing immediately. That happens more than people admit, especially immigrants, especially parents, especially couples carrying unspoken stress for too long. The strange thing is, after she cried, the apartment atmosphere actually felt lighter. Not because problems disappeared, because truth finally entered the room. Psychologists often explain that emotional vulnerability increases intimacy because honesty removes the exhausting pressure of emotional performance. Pretending drains people. Real connection begins when masks become unnecessary. In simple language, Humans breathe easier around honesty. Before leaving for work later that morning, I looked at her differently. Not as the strong one. Not as the person criticizing me. Not as the partner who does not understand my struggles. I saw her as a tired human being trying unbelievably hard to hold our family together while carrying invisible emotional weight every single day. And honestly, that perspective changed everything. Because compassion grows the moment ego stops demanding center stage. That afternoon at work, while lifting heavy boxes inside the warehouse, her words replayed inside my head repeatedly. I miss feeling safe with you. Not rich, not perfect, not successful, safe. And suddenly I understood something life-changing. Most people are not secretly craving perfection inside relationships. They are craving emotional peace. A place where they can finally stop pretending to be okay all the time. That night after dinner, I opened my little English notebook again. But instead of writing about my fears, I wrote something completely different. My wife has been strong for too long. Then below it, slowly and carefully, I added another sentence. I want to become her safe place again. And for the first time in a very long time, that goal felt more important than sounding fluent in English. Learning to say sorry. There is something almost ridiculous about the fact that I could survive immigration paperwork, warehouse shifts, culture shock, sleepless nights, financial pressure, and broken English but still struggle to say two simple words to my wife. I'm sorry. Not dramatic poetry. Not a cinematic speech under the rain. Just two tiny words that somehow felt heavier than every box I lifted at work. And honestly, if you have ever been emotionally stubborn, you already understand this strange human problem. Pride convinces people that apologizing means losing power, when in reality, refusing to apologize slowly destroys connection. The weirdest part? Deep down, most people already know they are wrong long before they admit it aloud. Their ego just keeps holding emergency meetings trying to protect their image like an exhausted lawyer defending a terrible case. For days after my wife cried in the kitchen, her words stayed inside my head constantly. I miss feeling safe with you. That sentence followed me everywhere. At work. In traffic. During English practice videos. Even while brushing my teeth at night. Funny how emotionally painful sentences suddenly become your brain's favorite background music. And the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable truths appeared. I had apologized before in our marriage, technically. But many of those apologies were fake emotional coupons. You know the type. Sorry you feel that way. Sorry but I was stressed. Sorry but you also. Those are not apologies. Those are defensive speeches, wearing apology costumes. Real accountability sounds different because it requires vulnerability without immediately protecting yourself afterward. Psychologists explain that genuine apologies reduce emotional defensiveness because they signal empathy, responsibility, and emotional safety. But pride resists apology because the brain associates admitting fault with social weakness. In simple language, your nervous system acts like saying, I was wrong, might cause immediate death, which honestly explains a lot about humanity. One evening after work, I sat alone inside my truck outside our apartment building for almost 40 minutes rehearsing a conversation in English. Not because my wife needed English. We both spoke Vietnamese together most of the time at home. But somewhere deep inside, practicing emotional honesty in English felt symbolic to me, like rebuilding a broken version of myself piece by piece. I whispered quietly while gripping the steering wheel. I'm sorry for being distant. I'm sorry for shutting down. I'm sorry you felt alone. The sentences sounded awkward, heavy, vulnerable. And every time I practiced them, another voice inside my head immediately argued back. But you were struggling too. But she hurt you too. But you worked hard. Ego always wants equal blame distribution before allowing softness. It negotiates compassion like a hostage situation. Meanwhile, love quietly waits for somebody brave enough to stop keeping score. When I finally entered the apartment, the children were asleep already. Soft yellow light filled the living room. My wife sat at the dining table helping our youngest finish a school project. Colored paper, glue sticks, crayons everywhere. The table looked like a tiny craft store explosion. She looked up briefly. "You're late," she said softly. Not angry, just tired. Again, somehow that hurt more. I sat down across from her and watched silently while she cleaned glitter off the table. Tiny silver pieces clung stubbornly to her sweater sleeves like emotional symbolism directly written by Netflix. And suddenly fear hit me hard. Not fear of rejection. Fear of emotional exposure. Because once you say the truth aloud, you cannot hide behind silence anymore. Neuroscience shows emotional vulnerability activates threat responses in the brain similar to physical danger. Your nervous system literally reacts to deep honesty like something risky is happening. That explains why difficult conversations can make your chest tighten, your hands sweat, and your stomach feel weird. Basically, your body sometimes treats emotional openness like skydiving. I almost stayed silent again. Honestly, old version of me probably would have. But then my wife yawned quietly while rubbing her tired eyes, and something inside me cracked open completely. I realized this woman had spent years carrying stress beside me while I emotionally disappeared behind pride and exhaustion. So before my courage escaped, I finally said it. "I'm sorry." The room became incredibly quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed emotionally invested. My wife stopped moving slowly and looked at me carefully, like she was trying to determine whether the sentence was real or just another temporary emotional weather change. And honestly, I understood her hesitation. Trust weakens when people repeatedly avoid vulnerability. "I'm sorry for shutting you out," I continued quietly. "I thought staying silent made me strong, but I think it only made me lonely. And maybe it made you lonely too." My voice sounded shaky by the end. Not dramatic crying, just honest trembling. The kind people try hiding by looking at the floor too much. She stared at me for several seconds without speaking. Those seconds felt longer than entire work shifts. Then something unexpected happened. She started crying again. Not because the conversation became worse, because emotional walls were finally collapsing. That is the strange thing about real apologies. Sometimes they release emotions both people have been carrying for months. She sat down slowly beside me at the table and whispered, "I thought you stopped caring." That sentence physically hurt. Because deep down, I knew my silence had accidentally communicated exactly that. Humans are emotional translators. When love disappears from actions, the brain fills empty spaces with painful assumptions. If somebody stops talking, we assume they stopped caring. If somebody becomes distant, we assume we are unwanted. If somebody never apologizes, we assume our pain does not matter. And honestly, many relationships do not fail because love disappears. They fail because fear and pride distort communication until both people feel emotionally abandoned. I looked at my wife and finally admitted the truth I had hidden for too long. I was ashamed, I whispered. She frowned slightly. "Of what?" "Everything," I said softly. "My English,
My job.
my stress, feeling weak all the time. I think I stopped talking because I didn't want you to see how lost I felt." That confession changed the atmosphere instantly. Not magically perfect, but human.
Real.
Because vulnerability invites vulnerability. When one nervous system finally relaxes enough to tell the truth, the other often follows. My wife leaned back in the chair quietly and wiped tears from her face. Then she laughed softly through exhaustion. You know what's funny? She whispered. I thought you were angry at me this whole time. And there it was. The tragic comedy of relationships. Two people deeply loving each other, while both secretly believing they are unwanted. Honestly, humans would communicate better if ego stopped acting like an emotionally unstable security guard. We talked for hours that night. Really talked. Not logistics. Not parenting schedules. Not bills.
Actual feelings. Fear.
Loneliness. Homesickness. Pressure.
Identity.
Exhaustion. Dreams we stopped mentioning because survival consumed too much energy. Outside, rain hit the apartment windows again, while America kept moving loudly somewhere beyond our little exhausted world. But inside that kitchen, something important happened. For the first time since moving to the United States, we stopped pretending strength mattered more than honesty. And strangely, that conversation improved my English too. Because emotional truth makes language easier somehow. Words stop feeling like performance. They start feeling alive. Before going to bed, my wife squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "Thank you for finally talking to me." Simple sentence. Yet it healed something inside my chest immediately. That night, after everyone slept, I opened my little notebook again. But this time I did not write about fear. I wrote one sentence slowly and carefully in English. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can say is sorry. And honestly, that sentence changed my marriage more than perfect grammar ever could. A walk in winter. Winter in Chicago feels personal. Not normal cold. Not bring a jacket cold. I mean the kind of cold that slaps your ancestors awake. The kind of wind that enters your bones and immediately starts paying rent there. And somehow, standing in that freezing air beside my wife one December evening became one of the warmest memories of our entire marriage. We had traveled to Chicago for a short family trip because our children wanted to see snow for the first time. Texas winters had already confused them enough. But real Chicago winter? That was like introducing tiny tropical fish to Antarctica. The city looked beautiful that night. Streetlights reflected across icy sidewalks. Steam rose from subway grates. Cars moved slowly through glowing downtown streets, while strangers hurried past wrapped in scarves and oversized coats. Everything felt cinematic in that classic American movie way. Yet underneath the beauty, I could still feel traces of the old emotional distance lingering quietly between my wife and me. Not because we stopped trying, because healing takes time. That is the annoying thing nobody tells you about relationships. One honest apology does not instantly erase months of emotional exhaustion. Trust rebuilds slowly through repeated safety, repeated honesty, repeated softness. Human nervous systems need evidence before relaxing again. Basically, love is less like fireworks and more like physical therapy.
Slow.
Awkward. Necessary. That evening after dinner, my wife and I decided to walk alone while the children stayed at the hotel with cartoons and snacks, living their best tiny tourist lives. The cold air hit my face immediately as we stepped outside. My wife laughed softly while struggling to wrap her scarf correctly. "I can't feel my ears," she complained. "Pretty sure my soul froze 3 blocks ago," I replied. And for the first time in a long time, our laughter sounded natural again. Not forced. Not polite.
Real.
Funny how healing sometimes announces itself quietly through tiny moments instead of dramatic speeches. We walked slowly through crowded winter streets while Christmas lights glowed above us. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played soft jazz music that floated through the cold air beautifully. People carried hot coffee cups, shopping bags, heavy coats, invisible stress. America always fascinated me that way. Millions of strangers moving quickly while privately carrying entire emotional universes nobody else can see. Honestly, adulthood feels like everybody silently dragging emotional furniture through airports. At first, my wife and I talked about simple things. The children.
Food. Snow. Funuturist moments.
But eventually conversations become deeper when two people finally feel emotionally safe enough again. That is the strange thing about reconnection. Once honesty returns, silence stops feeling dangerous. We crossed a small bridge overlooking dark water partially frozen beneath city lights. Wind hit harder there, sharp and brutal. My wife held my arm tightly while shivering. Then she suddenly asked something unexpected. Do you ever regret moving to America? That question hung in the cold air between us. And, honestly, part of me wanted to give a simple answer. But healing had already taught me something important. Simple answers often hide complicated truths. So instead, I paused honestly. Sometimes, I admitted quietly. She nodded slowly, without looking surprised. Me too. There it was again. Another hidden truth finally stepping into the open after years of emotional hiding. Psychologists explain that emotional intimacy deepens when people reveal vulnerable truths without fear of judgment. The nervous system relaxes when authenticity becomes safer than performance. In simple language, humans connect through honesty, not perfection. And standing there freezing beside Lake Michigan, I realized how long both of us had been pretending we needed to stay emotionally strong all the time. We kept walking. Snow crunched softly beneath our shoes. The city glowed around us like another universe compared to the noisy streets back in Vietnam. Then my wife whispered something that surprised me. I used to think America would automatically make us happier.
Oof.
That sentence hit deeply because I once believed the same thing. Many people secretly imagine changing countries will automatically heal emotional problems. Bigger opportunities, better money, better future, better life. But nobody escapes themselves through geography. If communication is broken before immigration, stress magnifies it afterward. If emotional wounds exist before marriage struggles, pressure exposes them more clearly. America gave us opportunities, yes. But it also stripped away distractions. No large family nearby.
No familiar routines.
No emotional safety net. Just two tired adults forced to face themselves honestly. Neuroscience shows stress intensifies existing emotional patterns rather than creating entirely new personalities. Under pressure, unresolved fears, insecurities, and attachment habits become stronger. In simple terms, difficult environments reveal what already lives inside people. That realization humbled me. Because I stopped blaming America completely. Yes, immigration was hard. Yes, English struggles damaged my confidence. Yes, financial pressure exhausted us. But some of our deepest suffering came from emotional avoidance, from pride, from silence, from fear of vulnerability. As we walked farther downtown, snow began falling lightly again. Tiny white flakes landed softly across my wife's dark coat. The entire city suddenly looked quieter somehow. Then she said something so honest, it physically hurt my chest. There were nights I felt lonely even when you were sitting beside me. I stopped walking immediately, not because I felt defensive, because I knew exactly what she meant. Emotional absence creates a special kind of loneliness. Sometimes people can physically share the same room while emotionally living on different planets. And honestly, many couples never recover from that distance because they become too afraid to admit it exists. I looked at her carefully under the soft city lights. I was scared all the time, I admitted quietly. I just hit it badly. Scared of what? Failing here, I whispered. Failing you. Failing the kids. Failing at English. Failing at becoming the person I thought I needed to be in America. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then my wife squeezed my hand tighter inside her gloves. And suddenly I realized something painfully simple. The entire time I tried acting emotionally invincible, the person beside me never actually expected perfection. She just wanted honesty. That realization felt both comforting and embarrassing. Humans exhaust themselves performing strength nobody requested. We eventually found a small coffee shop glowing warmly against the freezing night. Inside, people sat quietly drinking hot chocolate and typing on laptops while soft music played overhead. We ordered drinks and sat near the window watching snow fall outside. At one point, my wife smiled softly and asked me to practice English with her again like we used to years earlier. So slowly, awkwardly, quietly, we started talking in simple English together. Not because we needed perfect grammar, because it reminded us who we were before stress buried everything. How do you feel now? She asked gently. I thought carefully before answering. Then I smiled. Tired, I said, but not alone anymore. Her eyes filled slightly with tears again. Not painful tears this time, relieved ones. And honestly, sitting there together while snow covered Chicago outside that warm little cafe, I finally understood something life-changing. Healing does not happen when two people stop hurting completely. Healing happens when two hurting people stop hiding from each other. Our children changed everything. Nobody prepares you for the terrifying moment when you realize your children have been quietly studying your marriage like a live documentary about emotional survival. Not listening occasionally, studying, absorbing, recording every sigh, every silence, every cold dinner conversation like tiny emotional scientists collecting data for future relationships. And honestly, that realization changed me more than any motivational video, self-help book, or late-night emotional breakdown ever could. It happened a few weeks after our Chicago trip. Life in Texas slowly returned to normal again. Work schedules, school lunches, laundry mountains, grocery runs, tiny ordinary routines that somehow consume entire adult lives. But underneath those routines, something softer had begun growing between my wife and me. Not perfect happiness. Real relationships are messier than social media couples pretending they naturally wake up smiling beside organized fruit bowls every morning. But we were trying again. Really trying. We talked more, listened more, argued less aggressively. And most importantly, we stopped treating vulnerability like a dangerous disease. One Saturday afternoon, our children sat in the living room building a blanket fort that looked structurally illegal. Pillows everywhere. Chairs barely surviving. Tiny socks somehow scattered across dimensions unknown to science. My wife and I sat nearby drinking coffee while pretending not to notice the apartment transforming into a small disaster zone. Then my youngest son crawled halfway out of the blanket fort and asked something completely unexpected. Why are you and mommy nicer now? Silence. Immediate emotional damage. Honestly, nothing exposes relationship problems faster than a child casually noticing their improvement. My wife and I looked at each other awkwardly. Because what exactly do you say in that moment? Oh yes. Tiny human, we were previously trapped inside a psychological battle between stress, pride, emotional suppression, and immigration-related anxiety. Children really humble adults quickly. I laughed nervously and asked, "What do you mean?" My son shrugged innocently. "You smile more now." That sentence hit harder than it should have. Because children notice emotional atmosphere before adults even admit it exists. Research in developmental psychology shows kids are extremely sensitive to parental emotional dynamics. They observe tone, facial expressions, body language, and patterns of interaction constantly. Even when adults think they are hiding tension, children often absorb stress silently through emotional environment alone. Basically, kids become tiny emotional weather apps. And apparently our emotional climate had improved enough for them to notice. That realization stayed with me all day. Later that evening, while helping my daughter with homework, another moment quietly broke my heart in the best possible way. She needed help reading simple English sentences aloud for school. Months earlier, situations like this embarrassed me deeply because my confidence around English still felt fragile. Sometimes hearing my children speak more naturally than me triggered weird insecurity inside my chest. But this time felt different. We sat together at the kitchen table while she slowly practiced reading. Then suddenly she pointed at one sentence and smiled proudly. "Daddy, you say English better now." Simple sentence. Tiny voice. Massive emotional impact. Because for the first time, I realized my children were not measuring perfection. They were witnessing effort. And honestly, effort changes family energy more than perfection ever could. Neuroscience actually supports this idea. Children feel emotionally safer when caregivers demonstrate repair, resilience, and emotional honesty rather than impossible perfection. Healthy relationships are not conflict-free. They are repair-capable. In simple language, kids do not need superhero parents. They need emotionally real ones. That night after the children slept, I sat quietly in the living room thinking about how close we came to losing emotional connection as a family. Not dramatic destruction. Something subtler. Emotional fading. The kind where people still love each other but stop expressing it naturally because stress consumes too much space. My wife sat beside me softly and asked, "What are you thinking about?" I looked toward the hallway where our children slept. "I think they noticed more than we realized," I admitted. She nodded immediately. "I know." Then she told me something painful. During our worst months emotionally, our daughter once asked her privately, "Why does Daddy always look sad now?" That sentence physically hurt me. Because children personalize emotional atmospheres automatically. When parents become distant, kids often assume something unsafe or wrong exists around them. And honestly, I hated realizing my unresolved stress had leaked into the emotional world of my children. Not intentionally, but still. That guilt sat heavily inside me. At the same time, another realization slowly appeared beside it. Children had also become part of our healing. Not because they solved our problems. Because they reminded us what mattered more than ego. Pride feels important until you imagine your children learning emotional coldness from you. Then suddenly winning arguments seems unbelievably stupid. The next weekend, we decided to spend a full day together without phones, work distractions, or emotional avoidance.
Just family time.
Simple. Ordinary. Real. We drove to a nearby park outside Dallas, where the weather finally felt warm again after weeks of cold wind. The kids ran everywhere immediately like tiny caffeinated squirrels escaping civilization. My wife laughed while chasing them across the grass. And standing there watching them, I noticed something strange. She looked lighter again. Not completely free from stress, but softer. More alive. Like pieces of her personality were finally returning after being buried under exhaustion for too long. At one point my son grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the playground. "Come play with us." Now listen carefully. Where housework destroys knees, immigration stress destroys energy. And playground equipment designed for children over age 6 should honestly require adult medical waivers. But I went anyway. Because somewhere between all the emotional chaos of the past year, I forgot something deeply important. Joy requires participation. You cannot emotionally disappear from life and still expect connection to survive naturally. For nearly an hour we played together while the Texas sun warmed everything around us.
We laughed, ran, talked,
Took ridiculous family photos. My wife filmed videos while laughing at my terrible attempts climbing playground structures clearly built by tiny, fearless humans. And for the first time in years, home stopped feeling like a place filled with pressure. It felt safe again. That evening, exhausted and sunburned, we all ate burgers together while sitting on a park bench watching the sky slowly change colors. Then my daughter leaned against my shoulder sleepily and whispered, "I like when we're happy."
oof.
Another tiny sentence. Another emotional earthquake. Because happiness inside families is often built from ordinary moments children remember forever without adults realizing it at the time. Not expensive vacations. Not perfect houses. Just emotional warmth. Presence.
Softness.
Laughter returning naturally to rooms where tension once lived. Psychologists explain that secure family attachment develops through repeated experiences of emotional availability and responsiveness. In simple terms, children feel safest when love feels visible, predictable, and emotionally present. That realization changed the way I viewed success completely. For so long, I thought becoming a better father meant earning more money, speaking perfect English, or building a more stable American life. But sitting there beside my tired, beautiful family while evening sunlight covered the park softly, I finally understood something far more important. Sometimes children do not need parents who always know what they are doing. Sometimes they simply need parents brave enough to keep choosing love over pride again and again. And honestly, that choice saved our family long before I fully realized it. The night we finally forgave. There is a strange moment in healing when you suddenly realize the relationship was never truly fighting against each other. Both of you were fighting exhaustion, fear, insecurity, loneliness, pressure, and pride the entire time. But pain is sneaky. It changes the target. Instead of attacking the problem together, humans accidentally start attacking the closest person carrying pain beside them. And honestly, that realization arrived for us on one quiet night that looked completely ordinary from the outside. No dramatic music. No expensive vacation. No movie-style romantic speech under fireworks. Just two tired immigrants sitting on a small apartment balcony in Texas while warm summer wind moved softly through the dark. The children were asleep inside. The apartment finally felt calm for once. Somewhere far away, traffic hummed through the city like distant ocean waves. The air smelled faintly of rain and barbecue from neighboring apartments because America somehow always smells like grilled meat during summer. Evenings. My wife sat beside me wrapped in a light blanket while holding a cup of tea. I held my old English notebook in my lap, flipping through worn pages filled with messy handwriting and emotional survival sentences. Looking back through those pages felt almost surreal. I feel lost. I miss home. I'm afraid all the time. I want my family to feel safe. Tiny broken English sentences carrying enormous emotional weight. And suddenly I realized something important. That notebook had quietly recorded the entire emotional journey of our marriage without me fully noticing at the time. The fear, the distance, the pride, the reconnection, the healing. Human beings really are strange creatures. Sometimes we cannot speak honestly until pain becomes too heavy to hide anymore. My wife leaned her head softly against my shoulder and whispered, "You write differently now." I smiled slightly. Hopefully better English? She laughed quietly.
No, softer.
That word stayed inside my chest.
Softer.
Not stronger. Not richer. Not more successful.
Softer.
And honestly, maybe softness was the thing our marriage needed most all along. Psychologists often explain that long-term relationship success depends less on avoiding conflict and more on emotional repair. Couples who survive difficult seasons are usually not the couples without pain. They're the couples willing to reconnect after pain without allowing ego to permanently harden them. In simple language, love survives when people stop treating vulnerability like losing. The balcony lights reflected softly across my wife's face while we talked quietly about everything we survived together over the past few years. Immigration stress, financial pressure, parenting struggles, English insecurity, loneliness, cultural adjustment, emotional distance. At one point she suddenly laughed and said, "Remember when you ordered that giant birthday cake coffee by accident?" I immediately groaned. "Please don't bring up my public English humiliation." She laughed harder. And weirdly enough, that moment felt deeply healing too. Because painful memories lose power once people can laugh together again. That is one beautiful thing about emotional recovery. The same memories that once carried shame slowly transform into stories of survival instead. We sat quietly for a while afterward, listening to summer insects outside. Then my wife asked something unexpected. "Do you think we would have survived if neither of us apologized?" That question hit me harder than expected. Because deep down, I already knew the answer.
No.
Maybe legally, we would have stayed together for years longer. Maybe routines would continue. Bills paid. Holidays celebrated. Family photos posted online, smiling beside hidden emotional exhaustion. But emotionally, we would have drifted farther apart slowly until love became mostly memory and responsibility. And honestly, that happens to many couples. Not because they stop loving each other, because pride quietly replaces vulnerability. Neuroscience shows chronic emotional defensiveness weakens intimacy over time because the brain begins associating the relationship itself with stress instead of safety. When unresolved tension becomes constant, emotional closeness starts feeling risky instead of comforting. Basically, the nervous system stops relaxing around the person it once trusted most. That realization still scares me sometimes. Because we came dangerously close to becoming emotionally numb beside each other. I looked at my wife carefully before answering. "No," I admitted softly. "I think forgiveness saved us." She nodded slowly, without speaking. And suddenly another uncomfortable truth appeared inside my mind. Forgiveness sounds beautiful in quotes online, but real forgiveness is messy, repeated, uncomfortable. It is not pretending pain never happened. It is choosing not to weaponize pain forever afterward. That takes enormous emotional maturity, especially when exhaustion already drained both people. My wife stared out toward distant apartment lights while speaking softly. "You know what hurt the most?" I swallowed nervously.
What?
"You stopped letting me comfort you."
Oof.
That sentence physically hurt, because she was right again. When I felt ashamed, I isolated. When I felt weak, I became quiet. When I felt insecure, I emotionally disappeared behind pride and stress. I thought protecting my vulnerability made me stronger. But all it really did was leave both of us lonely. Humans do this constantly. They crave connection while simultaneously hiding the exact emotions needed to create it. Honestly, relationships would improve dramatically if people stopped acting like emotional secrecy deserves Olympic medals. The warm night air moved gently across the balcony again while I stared down at my notebook quietly. Then I found one older sentence written months earlier during our worst emotional season. "I don't know how to fix us." Reading that sentence, now felt almost unreal. Because back then, I truly believed our emotional distance might become permanent. I thought maybe marriage slowly dies for everyone eventually. I thought maybe adulthood simply turns people colder over time. But sitting beside my wife that night, I finally understood something different. Love does not disappear automatically. It weakens when neglected. It strengthens when protected. Tiny actions matter more than people realize. Listening fully. Apologizing sincerely. Speaking gently after difficult days. Holding somebody while they cry instead of solving everything immediately. Choosing understanding over ego repeatedly. That is how relationships survive modern life. Not through perfection. Through emotional courage. My wife suddenly touched my notebook and smiled softly. "You should keep writing," she whispered. "Even my terrible grammar?" "Especially your terrible grammar." We both laughed again. And honestly, that laugh healed something deep inside me because it reminded me who we were underneath all the pressure. Not broken people. Just tired people learning how to love each other again. A few minutes later, we went back inside quietly to check on the children before sleeping. Our youngest son had kicked his blanket completely onto the floor like tiny chaotic humans somehow always do. My wife covered him gently while I stood nearby watching. Then something unexpectedly emotional happened. My son half opened his sleepy eyes and mumbled softly, "Love you, Mommy. Love you, Daddy." Then immediately fell asleep again. Simple words. Half-conscious child voice. Massive emotional impact. Because suddenly I realized our children were growing up watching something important now. Not a perfect marriage. A repaired one. And honestly, that may be even more valuable. They were learning that love sometimes struggles. That humans make mistakes. That stress changes people. But also that healing is possible when pride stops controlling the relationship. Before bed that night, I opened my notebook one last time and wrote slowly in careful English beneath all the older, painful pages. We chose forgiveness over pride. Then, after a long pause, I added another sentence underneath it. And that choice gave our family back to us. Happiness was never perfection. A strange thing happened one Sunday morning that made me realize our family had truly changed. Nobody was arguing. Nobody was stressed about bills. Nobody was crying dramatically in the kitchen while questioning life choices under fluorescent lighting. Honestly, nothing important happened at all. And somehow, that became the important thing. Sunlight moved softly across the apartment while the smell of pancakes filled the kitchen. My daughter sat on the floor practicing English reading, with exaggerated dramatic pronunciation like she was performing Shakespeare for emotionally.
Exhausta immigrants.
My youngest son built another suspiciously unstable pillow fort in the living room. My wife stood beside the stove laughing quietly at something on her phone while music played softly in the background. Normal morning. Tiny apartment. Ordinary life. But standing there holding coffee in my hands, I suddenly felt something that had been missing for a very long time.
Peace.
Not excitement. Not achievement. Not perfect happiness like social media families pretending life naturally looks beautiful every second. Real peace. The kind that quietly settles into your chest when your nervous system finally stops preparing for emotional disaster all the time. And honestly, that feeling almost made me emotional. Because months earlier, this same apartment felt completely different. The rooms carried tension. Silence felt heavy. Conversations sounded careful. Even laughter arrived cautiously, like it needed permission to exist.
But now,
everything felt softer, lighter, human again. My wife noticed me standing there staring emotionally into space like a confused philosopher holding pancakes. "What are you thinking about?"
she asked.
I smiled slowly. I think we survived. She laughed gently, barely. And honestly, she was right. There were moments I truly thought stress would permanently damage our marriage. Immigration pressure, financial fear, English insecurity, emotional exhaustion,
Pride.
loneliness. All those things slowly stacked together until our relationship almost disappeared underneath them. But somehow, we found our way back. Not through magic, not through perfection, through honesty, through softness, through choosing connection repeatedly even when vulnerability felt uncomfortable. Psychologists explain that healthy long-term relationships depend less on constant happiness and more on emotional resilience. Couples who thrive are not people without stress. They are people who repair after stress instead of allowing pain to harden permanently into emotional distance. In simple language, strong relationships are built by people willing to return to each other after difficult seasons. That realization changed the way I viewed love completely. Growing up, I imagined successful relationships looked effortless. Movies teach people strange things. Romantic music, perfect timing, beautiful speeches, dramatic reunions under rainstorms while everybody somehow still looks attractive despite emotional collapse. Real love looks very different. Sometimes real love looks like exhausted parents apologizing quietly after midnight. Sometimes it looks like repeating English sentences together at the kitchen table because confidence disappeared somewhere between immigration, paperwork, and survival stress. Sometimes it looks like holding somebody while they cry without trying to immediately fix them. And sometimes love looks unbelievably ordinary. Making coffee for each other, listening fully after hard work days, laughing again after months of tension, choosing kindness when ego demands defensiveness. That morning after breakfast, we decided to drive together as a family without any real destination. Just one of those slow American weekend drives where people buy iced coffee larger than basic human organs and pretend traffic is part of the adventure. The Texas sky looked enormous above us. Endless blue stretching across highways lined with gas stations, restaurants, giant billboards, and pickup trucks that honestly looked large enough to transport small dinosaurs. The children argued cheerfully in the back seat about music choices, while my wife rested her hand quietly on mine near the center console. Tiny gesture, huge emotional meaning. Because touch changes when relationships heal. It stops feeling automatic and starts feeling intentional again. At one red light, my wife looked at me carefully and smiled. You seem different lately. That sentence surprised me. Different how? She thought for a second. Calmer, she said softly. Like you're finally here again. Oof. That hit deeply. Because I realized how emotionally absent I had become during our hardest years in America. Physically present. Mentally overwhelmed. Modern life rewards productivity while quietly starving emotional presence. Work harder. Earn more. Stay busy. Keep functioning. Meanwhile, relationships slowly weaken from emotional neglect disguised as responsibility. Neuroscience shows chronic stress keeps the nervous system trapped in survival mode, reducing emotional awareness and relational connection over time. In simple terms, exhausted brains struggle to fully experience joy because they remain focused on potential problems constantly. Basically, stress steals presence first. And without presence, even love starts feeling distant. Later that afternoon, we stopped near a small lake outside the city, where families walked quietly beneath warm sunlight. Children fed ducks near the water, while couples sat on benches drinking coffee and pretending adulthood made sense. We walked slowly together while the kids ran ahead laughing. Then suddenly my daughter turned around and shouted, "Mommy and Daddy are smiling again." Subtle child observation. Absolutely devastating emotionally. Because children remember emotional atmospheres more than adults realize. And in that moment, I understood something important. Our healing did not only belong to us anymore. It changed the emotional world our children were growing inside too. That realization humbled me deeply. For years I thought success in America meant financial stability, fluent English, bigger opportunities, maybe eventually owning a beautiful house someday. But standing there beside the lake watching my family laugh together naturally again, success suddenly looked much simpler. Emotional safety.
Peace at home.
Children who feel secure. A marriage where honesty survives difficult seasons. That felt richer than anything else. As the sun slowly lowered across the water, my wife leaned against me quietly. Then she whispered something I will probably remember forever. I'm glad we didn't give up on each other. Simple sentence. But inside those words lived years of struggle, forgiveness, fear, growth, and survival. And honestly, I felt the exact same way. Because giving up would have been easier sometimes. Pride is easier. Silence is easier. Emotional walls are easier. But easier things often create lonelier lives. Healing required vulnerability, patience, repeated honesty, choosing compassion during moments when ego demanded distance. And somewhere along that difficult journey, I finally learned something life-changing. Happiness was never hidden inside perfect English, or perfect jobs, or perfect marriages, or perfect lives. Real happiness lived inside connection, inside forgiveness, inside tiny ordinary moments where people feel emotionally safe enough to become fully themselves again. That night after everyone fell asleep, I opened my little notebook one final time and wrote slowly beneath every painful page, every broken sentence, every emotional confession that carried us through those difficult years. Love survived because we stopped trying to win. Then underneath it, carefully and honestly, I added one final sentence. Sometimes the strongest people are simply the ones brave enough to stay soft. Maybe the real reason you found the story tonight is because a part of you is tired of pretending to be strong all the time. Maybe your heart is exhausted from carrying silent pain, broken communication, pressure, loneliness, or pride that nobody else can see. But here's the truth most people learn too late in life. Happiness rarely disappears in one big moment. It slowly fades when people stop speaking honestly, stop listening gently, and stop choosing each other during difficult seasons. This story was never just about learning English in America. It was about learning how to stay soft in a world that constantly teaches people to become emotionally hard. And if you're still here watching until the end, maybe deep down you're not ready to give up either. Maybe your relationship still deserves one more honest conversation. Maybe your family still deserves one more chance at peace. Maybe you still deserve a life where love feels safe again. If this story touched your heart even a little, subscribe to the channel and join this growing community where we practice slow English listening. Real English stories, English conversation practice, and emotional life lessons through simple everyday stories in America. Every new video is designed to help you improve your English naturally while also healing, relaxing, and reconnecting with yourself through real human emotions and meaningful storytelling. Leave a comment below. What sentence in this story felt most personal to you? Your answer might quietly help someone else who is struggling too. And remember this before you go tonight. Sometimes people don't lose happiness because life became impossible. They lose it because pride became louder than love.
See you in the next story.